Good afternoon. Welcome to Cool Springs. Today is Wednesday, December the 17th, 2025, and this is our series, Heroes and Heroines of the Church Age. And the person I've chosen to talk about today is not some famous saint of church history or famous preacher or educator or anybody that you would, missionary, anybody that you would think of as famous. It's an ordinary Christian. But it's a representative of how Christians are supposed to be, and it's particularly appropriate right now. We happen to be in the middle of the Feast of Dedication, is the way it's described in the New Testament. Hanukkah is the way the Jewish community refers to it. It's about a historical event that happened with the Jewish people in between our Old and our New Testament times, when they were under the authority of the Greeks, and a Greek leader by the name of Antiochus IV, he called himself Antiochus Epiphanes, God manifest. There was a guy with an ego issue. But he was trying to force the Jews to stop doing Jewish things like circumcising their children. He wanted them to adopt the Greek language, the Greek culture. He started a revolt because he kept persecuting Jews and putting them to death if people were found to take their infant sons and be following the religious law of circumcising their sons. The babies and their mothers would be killed on the spot. All kinds of wicked things he was doing to try to force them to stop being Jewish, conform with the way society was going, or die. And he reached a point where he had a statue of his Greek god Zeus placed inside the temple. And the Jewish people had had all they could stand. So they revolted. And they wound up in a 3-year period of time kicking out the Greeks. And when they went to clean up the destroyed temple complex and to rededicate it after he had desecrated it, he'd had a pig, an unclean animal, slaughtered on the altar, desecrating it. He'd had this graven image, violating the law and the 10 Commandments, put up inside the temple itself in the Holy of Holies. They needed to rededicate the temple. They needed to clean the place up, sanitize it, and rededicate it. And when they were in the process of cleaning it up, they discovered just one cruse, a jar of oil that was used to light the temple menorah. It takes 8 days to properly prepare fresh oil to make sure that it's pure to be used in lighting the candles in the menorah, lighting the menorah. They only had a 1-day supply. So they had a choice to make. Do we light it up now, knowing we've only got a 1-day supply, and when it runs out, we're just going to have to wait until we can properly prepare new oil? Do we compromise and use just any old oil until it's time? Or do we wait to rededicate the temple until we've prepared enough to keep the supply going of proper oil? And they decided that they were going to use the one pure cruse of oil that they had and trust God for the outcome. And that 1-day supply miraculously lasted all 8 days till they had time to properly prepare new oil. The point there was they were being faithful to God. They weren't cutting corners under a time when Jews were being persecuted. This is 2025, and just this past Sunday, which happened to be the first night of the annual celebration now of the Feast of Hanukkah, which means dedication. In Australia, as Jews were gathering in large numbers to celebrate this holiday on what God did for them, there was an ambush, and a bunch of people were killed and many, many more were wounded. They were being persecuted for just being Jews. So what I had planned to do as today's heroes and heroines of the church. I'll defer to the next time we meet, because I want to tell you about one guy in World War II, a master sergeant in the U.S. Army by the name of Roddie Edmonds. He was a prisoner of war of the Germans. As a master sergeant, he was the senior NCO in this prisoner of war camp among the American troops, and they didn't have any officers prisoned there with them. So he's the ranking person for the American prisoners of war. And among the 1,000 American troops who were in this particular German prison camp, 200 of those soldiers were Jewish. And because it's January 1945 and the invasion of Europe by the Allies has taken place, and the Battle of the Bulge has taken place, and Germany is being pushed back out of all the countries it had conquered, back inside of its own borders, and the Allies are approaching Germany. Soldiers on both sides know it's just a matter of time until the war is over. Even prisoners of war in a prison of war camp could hear rumors talked about by the prison guards. They could occasionally see Allied planes flying overhead doing their missions, and they would know the war is turned. It won't be long now until liberation occurs. And so the German officer in charge of this particular prison camp issued an order saying that all the prisoners were to line up, and that when he gave the command, any soldier among the prisoners of war who was Jewish was to step forward. By now, even prisoners isolated from a lot of news because they're prisoners in a prisoner of war camp were beginning to hear about the atrocities that the Germans were committing, not just with prisoners of war, but with peoples in the lands that they had conquered, that they were segregating Jewish prisoners from others, and they were hearing rumors of death camps and mass executions. And so Master Sergeant Edmonds told the soldiers underneath him, we are not going to separate ourselves from our fellow American Jewish soldiers. If the Germans try to separate us, we all remain as one. We are one unit. Sure enough, the German commander, the commandant, has the prisoners line up, and he orders them to identify who's Jewish, and nobody moves. And he orders the ones who are not Jewish to move, thinking we can get them segregated that way, and nobody moves. And so the commandant goes and has the ranking NCO, Master Sergeant Edmonds, brought forward. And he put his pistol to the man's head. And he told him, if you don't order them to self-identify who is Jewish and who is not, I'm going to kill you right here and now. Edmonds has a choice to make. He can crack under the obvious threat. The man has the gun pointed at his head. He can feel the cold steel. He can know that in the next instant he can be dead. He can cave in to the enemy, or he can do what he knows to be right. They didn't know it until well after the war, the Jewish soldiers. But Sergeant Edmonds was a devout Christian. He was Methodist. He knew his scriptures. He knew what was right. He knew what would happen to those Jewish soldiers if he caved in, or if the Germans were able to get somebody else to crack and tell them who's Jewish and who's not. He was willing to die there in an instant, never being able to go home and see his family again. He could have caved in. But he knows if he caves as the leader, others will cave too. And he boldly refused to do what the commandant told him. And he's talking to the commandant where everybody can hear what he's saying. And he's telling that commandant, you can kill me, but we are one unit. We are not going to segregate ourselves from our fellow soldiers. We're American soldiers, all of us. You kill a one, you have to kill us all. We will stay united. And, and he also told that, excuse me for a second there. He also told that commandant, it won't be long till this war is over. And if you kill us now, you'll be executed for war crimes, because truth will come out. What are you going to do? And the commandant stood there for a while with the gun still pointed at the master sergeant's head, and he realized the man was speaking truth. And so slowly, he returned his weapon to its holster, and the troops weren't divided that day, or the next day, or the day after. Years later, after the war is long over with, Master Sergeant Edmonds didn't write up reports when they were liberated, didn't ask for a medal, didn't talk about his bravery. In fact, when he went home, he didn't even tell his own family what had happened that day in the prisoner of war camp. They only found out many years later, after he was gone, after they were going through some of his diaries and things that he had written down as private thoughts about what had happened. And then his family started to reach out to some of the men who used to be in his unit. You know, they could go through Army records and find some of those men, and they discovered how many of those men now alive, years after the war, having raised families, having had children and grandchildren, they could share with them the bravery that Master Sergeant Edmonds had done to save their lives, how he had risked himself for what was right. His life and his testimony of being willing to die for people who were different than him. They were his American soldiers, but they didn't worship Jesus. He was willing to sacrifice his life to save them. It was a witness to them. They recognized him as being righteous. They contacted the Yad Vashem Memorial in Jerusalem, in Israel, in modern times, and he was ultimately, years after his death, declared to be one of the righteous among the nations. That's something that the Israeli government does to recognize people who are not Jewish, who have put themselves at grave risk to save the life of Jewish people. Master Sergeant Roddie Edmonds, in 1945, was willing to face death, knowing that if that commandant fired that bullet, he would instantly be in the presence of his Savior. He was still willing to risk his life to save his soldiers. What are you and I willing to do to stand with people who need to hear the gospel, to speak up for truth, to be willing to do as Jesus said, greater love has no man than this, than he laid down his life for his friends? Do we even consider people who are different than us, people who don't believe the way we do in Jesus, as our friends? He's a role model for Christians in our time and in every time. Thanks for watching.